Three, two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Declan Ahern. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
Declan, welcome to the podcast. And how are you doing today?
I'm good, Wayne. Good. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Singapore, it's pretty okay. We are kind of on top of the COVID-19 situation. So everything is kind of like back to normal. Of course, some social distancing rules and all that. But otherwise, has been pretty great, pretty good couple of weeks. How about wherever you are? Where are you based, and what's happening in your city the past couple of weeks? Give us an update.
Yeah, sure. No, so I'm actually in London. I'm actually currently in the office, so we're based in the city of London, and I think similarly we are trending in the right direction with regards to kind of the whole COVID situation. Lockdowns getting easier and easier by the week. The weather's been great as well for the last 2 weeks, so everyone's been out and about, and I think just trying to get back to any relative normality that they can really.
Fantastic. So you're based in London. Which is your favorite London club, or do you support Man United?
I do support Man United, but obviously I have to be impartial given what I do and some of the work that we at Brand Finance have been doing.
Fantastic, and it's really nice of you to be 100% truthful to me, to us, because I also have another podcast where it's all about Liverpool supporters, where we talk a lot about the Liverpool. But of course, some of my best mates, my best friends are Man United supporters. So it's great to have you here. And of course, we're not here to talk about Man U versus Liverpool. We're here to talk about your expertise. And of course, this is maybe a great time to give you a 5-minute elevator pitch to tell us, what you do at Brand Finance. And of course, why evaluating, marketing, business decisions, right? Or even brand sponsorship for sports teams is so important at this day and age?
Yeah, so I work for a company called Brand Finance, as you mentioned. We are a strategy and valuation consultancy headquartered in London. We've actually got quite a big office in Singapore and a presence in approximately 20 countries worldwide. And we are experts in essentially valuing and managing branded businesses, of which, we consider branded businesses football clubs as well. And for the last 15 years, we have published our annual valuation rankings of the most valuable football brands in the world, which is essentially what I think we're going to be discussing today. And, I'm sure you're aware that table, or that ranking, if you will, gets huge interest worldwide. Across lots of media outlets, the clubs themselves, as well as the corporate sponsor brands that we cover within our research.
This is fantastic, and we can't wait to dive straight into some of the interesting things you have done. I think one of the articles on LinkedIn that really caught my eye was some of the posts by your colleagues. I think recently there was one which talks about why the true value of football sponsorship. It's so important. I think it's published by Steve Thompson, Inside Director at Finance. So he was talking about why sports sponsorship is a huge business, and like any marketing spend, its value and ROI need to be evaluated really carefully. So maybe to provide some context right here on this podcast, 80% of our listeners and audience are CMOs and C-suites who follow us on podcasts. We also have brand marketers, agencies who watch our live streams, and many of them actually comment during our streams, or they DM me directly after the stream that, they tell us that they also work with brands and they also do sports sponsorship. So our goal for this podcast is to provide more value for our listeners. And of course, the other 20% of our audience were entrepreneurs and creatives. And, our original podcast content and discussions with experts like you will help to bridge the gap between brands, marketing, sponsorship, sports, and of course, football. So let's maybe talk about this article that your colleague has posted on LinkedIn, where he mentioned that, almost certainly a huge brand like Nike or Adidas would, with no second thoughts, right? They would pay like 50,000 grand on maybe to have their brand name on Arsenal shirts. 50 million pounds maybe, but 500 million definitely not, right? Even though they recently won the FA Cup. Since this is a purely commercial decision. So which football team, in your opinion, in the world right now, in the middle of this pandemic and uncertainty swirling around us with the possibility of even a U.S.-China conflict coming to a boiling point, could still comfortably rake in the big bucks, and the brands could get behind completely 100% during, either pandemic or no pandemic, war threat or no war threats? What's your hot take on that?
Yeah, so look, this is kind of an area that we've been growing our expertise in. And as you rightly mentioned, we view corporate sponsorship of football brands and any other kind of sponsorship activity in sport as any other marketing spend should be viewed. You need to weigh up your options, whether you can get a good return on investment for the money that you're willing to pay. And if not, then you have a budget and you can move it elsewhere to other marketing activities, whether that be brand building campaigns or TV advertising or any other kind of marketing lever that CMOs can pull. What we do find though is that corporate sponsorship of sports teams, particularly high-profile sports teams, are very, very effective in that, firstly, they get a huge amount of reach. So depending on what the corporate brand's goals are, but more often than not, the first is increasing reach. And we know that football is a loved game globally, and these teams have huge global followings. So to leverage off the back of that reach is very important for corporate brands. And the second thing the corporate brands are really trying to do is to essentially borrow these brand equity or brand attributes from these football clubs onto their own brand. So, there's a lot of passionate fans around football, and football brands are very highly regarded, irrespective of whether you support the club or not. And ultimately, these corporate brands want to take some of that brand affinity and brand love and borrow it onto their own brands. Now, the article that you're referencing that my colleague is talking about is essentially saying that, well, I think if everyone takes a step back and intuitively thinks about it, you can see that these sponsorships have the ability to provide good return on investment and value for the corporate sponsor. But what does that value actually mean? So if we take Jeep, for example, who are the front of shirt sponsors of Juventus, ultimately what Jeep want to do is, sure, increase brand awareness and improve brand attributes, but they want to sell Jeeps. Essentially, they want their customers and non-customers actually to purchase Jeep vehicles versus other vehicles. Now, part of what we do within our research is actually try and measure the likelihood of consumers who are aware of the sponsorship of Jeep and Juventus and the likelihood that they have of actually purchasing a Jeep vehicle. And part of our research can link those kind of marketing metrics to customer behaviors and therefore financial metrics. So I bring up the Jeep and Juventus example because they actually have the highest brand recall rate within our sponsorship research. So 63% of responders could accurately recall that Jeep was the front of shirt sponsor for Juventus. To put that into a bit of context, I think second was Emirates and Arsenal with around 59%, and third was Rakuten and Barcelona with a recall of around 54%. Now, of course, all of these brands are paying different amounts of money for what is apparently, a different recall percentage and different brand image attributes that they're trying to borrow. So it's about, as a CMO of a large company or head of brand or someone making these marketing decisions, you need to try and take a data and value-based approach where you can decide, well, I'm willing to spend X amount of money for X amount of return in the form of higher awareness, more positive brand image attributes, and ultimately, in the case of Jeep, more car sales, for example.
So obviously, some of the football clubs that are doing really well are those that are ranked in your annual report, right? Later, we're going deep dive into the report a little bit more. But I understand that your colleague has published this LinkedIn article, and he mentioned that using rigorous analysis to inform partnership decision making is a really important element in a sponsorship evaluation for both the rights holder and the sponsor brand. And sponsoring brands will have different objectives and KPIs and measures, right? So if the commercial value is to be accessed, those measures must relate to financial performances in some ways. So definitely Facebook likes or media equivalents aren't enough, right? So maybe could you tell us, walk us through in terms of this methodology that to evaluate sponsorship activities, which involves determining the monetary value, ROI for sponsors, beyond advertising equivalency. Tell us more about this methodology that has been developed by Brand Finance.
Sure. So I briefly touched on it, but essentially what you want to do going into a sponsorship, if you're trying to assess, whether you sponsor a specific club or a league or a different sport, for example, you need to align your KPIs or brand-driven goals with the sponsorship asset. So ultimately, you, in an ideal world, want to share the same values as the sponsorship asset, whether it be a football club or otherwise. And let's just say, again, that if one of your goals is to increase reach or global brand awareness, or perhaps awareness in a specific market, naturally that's going to impact the decision of which club or sport or league that you decide to approach for a sponsorship agreement. So once that agreement or those KPIs have been identified, you then want to measure those KPIs over the lifespan of the sponsorship, and indeed, in an ideal world, pre the sponsorship. So you'd get a read of these KPIs. Let's call them, for argument's sake, brand consideration, brand preference, and brand reputation. You want to get a read of those pre-sponsorship and then a consistent read throughout the lifespan of the sponsorship. What that then enables you to do is to see whether or not people who are exposed to the sponsorship perceive the brand in a more favorable light. So is the sponsorship driving brand consideration, brand preference, and brand reputation? Overwhelmingly, what we find in our research is that that is the case. What you can then do is, through essentially two methods, is link those changes in consumer perceptions to financial performance. So the first way to do that is through the brand valuation methodology that we adopt, and that's called the royalty relief methodology. So because of the sponsorship, you are improving your brand attributes, which improves your brand strength, and that then improves your brand value. So ultimately increases the value of the brand assets that you as the CMO are guardian of. But really the second kind of avenue that we have developed is linking those brand attributes to customer behavior. So like I mentioned earlier with the Jeep example, we know and we've seen in our research that because Jeep sponsors Juventus, it drives brand consideration among those who are exposed to the sponsorship. I.e., if you know that Juventus are sponsored by Jeep, you are more likely to purchase a Jeep vehicle. So we can then link that to consumer behaviors, i.e., first-time buyers of a car, for example, and we can then run that through a business model. So if, for example, a person is more likely to purchase a Jeep vehicle because they've been exposed to the sponsorship, that would increase the revenue for Jeep. You would offset that by the actual cost per person exposed of the sponsorship to determine whether the return on investment has been positive or negative. And that's just done in a typical business valuation.
This is fantastic. Great insights so far. And we're going to deep dive into the Football Annual 2020, the annual brand value ranking that I think was published not too long ago. So this allows us to have even more insights and some interesting findings as well. And I think what's really interesting to fans of Real Madrid and Barcelona, right, is that neck and neck, they're still the world's most valuable football brands in the face of COVID-19. So could you maybe tell us why this is still, the current trend or the analysis and findings that Real Madrid and Barcelona are doing so well and still raking in the big bucks?
Yes, I mean it's a very valid question. So what you would have seen is a slight decline in value year on year, and that is largely due to kind of the onset of COVID and the risk climate. But the likes of Barcelona and Real Madrid are two clubs in particular that have an unbelievable ability to generate large amounts of revenue versus their peers. And if you're looking at a football club, essentially there are three key revenue streams for every football club and indeed other sports teams. So the first is match day income, and that's largely through ticket sales and perhaps the sale of merchandising in your team store on match day. The second is broadcasting income, and that comes from largely negotiated at a league level with media broadcasters, the likes of Sky, for example. And then the third revenue stream is commercial income, and that's front of shirt sponsors and other merchandise partners, kit manufacturers, etc. And what we see with Barcelona and indeed Real Madrid is they really tend to dominate those three revenue streams. So, firstly, they've got two of the largest, most iconic stadiums in the world, and they tend to operate at max capacity most weekends. So their match day revenue is very, very high. They benefit from a significant broadcasting deal for La Liga, i.e., to broadcast all of the La Liga matches worldwide. They also tend to perform well in the Champions League, so they benefit from those broadcasting deals as well, which are separate to the league ones. But then really where they have the most control and the most success is around commercial income. And that's the ability to attract sponsors for significant fees. So whether that be front of shirt sponsors or kit manufacturers or other types of commercial agreements, both domestic and globally. And those two clubs really do excel in that kind of sphere of football finance. And the reason that they do that is because they are such iconic brands. These are brands with unbelievable stars playing in their teams, got huge worldwide attraction capabilities. They also have huge on-field heritage and history, being unbelievably successful and tend to dominate either the La Liga or the Champions League going forward. And really, this gets them into a perpetual cycle where success on the field breeds success off the field, where you can attract more sponsorship income, get a bigger share of broadcasting rights, increase your match day revenue, and then invest those funds back into the club to purchase better players, again, to improve on-field performance and so on.
This is brilliant. And of course, we need to talk about why both of our favorite clubs are in the top four. I think Man United is third, although they are slipping in terms of the brand value results and findings, right? And Liverpool recently, winning the historic Premier League, is now 2 spots up into fourth place. So can you maybe tell us more about the performances of these two great English clubs in the Premier League?
Sure. So I think if we look at Manchester United firstly, so what we've seen is that their ability to grow their revenues has stagnated. So their revenue growth over the last few years has remained flat, and that is largely due to poorer on-field performances. So, in their own right, Manchester United are such a huge club with huge heritage and history. And as such, they have been able to historically attract very large commercial deals with corporate brands. But the lack of Champions League football last season really hurt their revenue income ability. And 2 seasons without Champions League football, they start getting these kickback clauses with the likes of Adidas, where they have to pay a certain amount of the commercial revenue back to Adidas for the sponsorship. They also haven't performed as well as in previous years within our football fan research, which helps us determine how strong a football brand is. And ultimately, Barcelona and Real Madrid have moved further ahead of them from their ability to generate those revenues as well as the on-field success. When you look at the likes of Liverpool, they've gone the other way essentially. They've grown their revenues impressively, and that's largely due to the ability to attract bigger commercial sponsorship arrangements. The likes of the Nike one that we've seen recently, and they've also moved up in our brand strength rankings to now the 4th strongest brand within the study. So the way to kind of think about the difference between brand value and brand strength is that, brand value is how much the actual financial asset or the trademark is worth if you were to sell it. But brand strength, which is a component of brand value, if you think of it in a way that it's how the club is perceived in the hearts and minds of all of its stakeholders, and particularly its fans. And we know historically that Liverpool has a very strong global fan base that feel a huge level of affinity and loyalty to the club. But that is now growing due to their on-field success, particularly the Champions League win last year.
This is fantastic. And of course, I agree with you 100% in terms of, the fans' loyalty to the club. Being a Liverpool fan as well, right? I also understand that our fans have been snapping up all the latest Nike home kit when it was launched a couple of days ago. So many are already, predicting that LeBron James, who is basically, the person who's also one of the owners of Liverpool, right? He has invested like 6.5 million, total investment into Liverpool Football Club, and many are predicting that his investment is paying off big time right now, even though the pandemic is going around the world, and of course there's a potential US and China conflict. So, what do you know about this Nike deal? Could you maybe shed more light into this particular deal, whether it benefits Liverpool in the way it's perceived to be, or like what many has been speculating? The club has actually received less money upfront for a potential better return in the long run. So this is definitely a long-term play. And in your opinion, do you think this is a wise decision with, how this pandemic has now made things so much more unpredictable?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. And I think, first and foremost, I think Nike and Adidas are really at the forefront of kit manufacturing. And that's not just because of the technological capabilities of those huge brands, but it's also because of the global reach in their distribution channels. And I think that's a large reason of why Liverpool are attracted to the Nike deal as opposed to renewing their existing or previous New Balance deal, for example. And you raise the kind of LeBron James investment as well. I think in 2011 he bought about 2% of Liverpool from Fenway Sports Group, which I think at the time people viewed that as quite a significant sum of money and a significant investment. But given kind of the growth of Liverpool from 2011 to today and the on-field success and the way that they've grown their brand and their revenues, it does appear to be a good investment on his part. I think what I would say is that up until now, we've seen LeBron James just relatively active on social media. He might post a picture of himself wearing a Liverpool shirt, and that might cause a flurry of excitement. But what I actually think we will see in the future is more set collaborations between LeBron James, Nike, and Liverpool. And I think for obvious reasons that that would benefit all three parties. For Nike, it's about selling their merchandise, whether that be shoes or shirt or Liverpool kit, for example. I think for Liverpool, the real benefit is that football clubs, particularly in Europe, are really trying to grow two markets, essentially. So the first is China, and the second is the US. And leveraging a partnership, firstly, with Nike, who has huge global presence in those markets, and secondly, with LeBron James, who is an icon of American sport, I think is a very, very clever way to grow the Liverpool brand and therefore grow potential revenue streams in the US market.
This is fantastic. And of course, not many Liverpool fans know about LeBron James, especially if they're not really keeping tabs on what's happening in NBA. But maybe the reverse is also true. Not many NBA fans know about Liverpool Football Club, right? So this is a way to basically educate one another, and of course also maybe discover another new sport through all these brand partnership and sponsorships. Just like Serena Williams in tennis as well. I think the Nike collaboration will probably bring in a new group of fans who have been introduced to the history of a Liverpool Football Club, and also the genius of Jurgen Klopp and the like. So we're gonna maybe talk a little bit more about LeBron James, right? He recently, basically modeled the new home kit when he was attending a game. I think when they had a venue where they are hosting all the NBA games, and some are already saying that what Nike can do for Liverpool is basically having people like LeBron James and from LA Lakers, right, help Liverpool with crossover marketing. Do you think that this sort of power move is necessary for every Premier League club to emulate moving forward? Are we expecting to see more like basketballers maybe doing more collaborations, like maybe PSG, right, is doing a lot of promotion of Air Jordan in their new line of Nike products, especially even Amazon on their home kit jerseys as well. So do you think that it's probably going to be a growing trend for Premier League clubs to have NBA basketballers as co-owners or even as some of their partners to evolve and grow their audience, expand it further into markets like US and China, which you mentioned?
I think so. So, ultimately, of those three revenue streams, clubs have very little control over the ability to negotiate higher broadcasting rights deals. And over the last 2 years, we've seen a trend of those broadcasting deals either remaining flat or in some markets shrinking. So what they can control is match day revenue and then commercial revenue streams. Now, match day revenue, they are relatively limited by the size of their stadium, and we've seen Tottenham Hotspurs, take the decision to move away from White Hart Lane to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and that's paying off very well at the moment because they've had huge success in generating greater match day revenue. But not every club is in the position to do that immediately. So therefore, you're looking at the third revenue stream, that commercial revenue stream, and asking yourself, well, how can we grow that into the future? So, that might be diversifying as a club, for example, going into esports, and we know PSG do that, for example. But that also might be an ability or an inclining to develop better commercial arrangements with other brands. And what we see with the LeBron deal, for example, like you said, it works both ways, where Liverpool can try and grow their presence in the US market, tap a much more affluent consumer over there, perhaps a more affluent consumer of sports merchandise who are willing to part way with their money to buy Liverpool branded clothing. Obviously, the football market is still hugely growing in the States, where it's much more mature in the US. And then, like you said, it works the other way around. The NBA are really interested in growing the game of basketball in the UK and in Europe and outside of the American market. The PSG Michael Jordan collaboration, which you mentioned, so the Jumpman collaboration, for example, has been relatively successful for PSG, where they're now launching away from a football brand essentially to become a holistic lifestyle brand, and all of the products that they are selling with the Jumpman logo have very little to do with football, but it's more of a fashion brand than anything else. And ultimately, again, what they're trying to do is just increase those merchandise sales, increase the partnerships that they can develop with corporate brands, and therefore increase revenue for the club going forward.
It's interesting that you mentioned the word lifestyle minutes ago, because LeBron James is basically epitomized, the fact that he's actually what we call the business rather than the basketballer, right? Or the famous NBA star. A lot of people who follow his career says that he's never about chasing Michael Jordan's 6 rings. That was Kobe Bryant's job, and LeBron James is more Jay-Z than he is Michael Jordan, right? He's good at what he does, which is about lifestyle, makes it a big business. So when you mention lifestyle, it immediately brings this, kind of judgment about his career to mind. But of course, everyone has a different take on LeBron James. And I'm going to have to ask you something about esports as well. You mentioned about esports as one of the innovative methods for football clubs to evolve and even to continue to grow their revenue stream. So in terms of the potential loss to Premier League clubs, especially now with preseason tours being cancelled, right? So like the likes of Man United used to tour Asia every year during their preseason. And Liverpool has been spending more time in US, obviously, for preseason tours. These are no longer possible. So how do they fill in the revenue gap and also service the needs of fans and corporate sponsors?
It's difficult, and I think the onset of COVID-19 has really been a catalyst for people to take esports seriously if they weren't doing that before, because what we saw was the inability for traditional sports to be played, with seasons being suspended and in some cases cancelled, and esports was thriving because in this environment you can play and watch and stream esports without that type of sport being affected, essentially. So I think we will see a lot of clubs continually to push harder in that space. We are seeing some clubs, already as leaders in that space, the likes of PSG, the likes of Wolves in the Premier League. They've really got quite a strong esports presence. And again, that's just about growing their brands kind of beyond just the football sphere. And according to our research, we know that consumers in the US and in China are more likely to have either played or watched an esport in the past month than their European counterparts. So I think that is definitely an avenue that European football clubs can take advantage of without, like you say, the ability to go on these preseason tours to grow their brands in those markets.
That's a fantastic answer. And we have a community submitted question. Yoki from Facebook has this question to ask you. Learning from Nike and LeBron James' case, right? What do you think is a similar way that Liverpool or other football club can do to reach the Chinese market?
It's a very difficult question. I think ultimately what it needs is a lot of research up front to see what the Chinese football fan and the Chinese consumer actually wants from their football club. So part of what our research actually shows is that the primary supporter in China, their first club is their local club, largely governed by region. Their second club is almost always one of the larger European clubs. So whether that be Real Madrid, Barcelona, Man United, Bayern Munich, Liverpool. And it's about these clubs trying to find a way to tap into that type of fan affinity, which you don't necessarily see in Europe. It would be very rare for a Liverpool supporter to turn around and say that their second club is a rival in the Premier League or even a European team. It's much more polarizing, if you will. I do think esports is the real opportunity for these clubs. Like I mentioned, the Chinese consumer has played esports more often in the last month, is willing to participate and watch esports much more than the European counterparts. And they are also more open to the idea of the teams that they're supporting having an esports arm, whereas what we see is European respondents are actually a lot more uncertain about their team participating kind of in the esports world. And I think that's largely due to perhaps an unfamiliarity with esports as a genre.
This is fantastic. And I think we just crossed the 35th minute mark. So I have to, maybe end our podcast very soon. But before that, I just want to say my appreciation and thanks to you for making time to come on this podcast and educate, the brand marketers and, of course, those who are working with brands on sports sponsorship. I think what you have mentioned today has really provided a lot of value to us. So being a Liverpool fan, right, it's also very valuable to get a handle on, the LeBron James and Nike collaboration. And of course, you mentioned about the royalty relief methodology behind brand evaluation and process. These are really, eye-opener for me and I think for the audience who are tuning in as well. So it's very fascinating to see, how so many metrics can all come together to calculate brand value, which can then be tracked over time. So before we let you go, any last message for those who are tuning in to this podcast on LinkedIn, on Facebook, Twitch, as well as YouTube?
No, well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. And secondly, what I would like to say is that as a football fan myself, I find some of the work I'm doing extremely engaging. And what we've done is publish all of this work in the form of the Football Annual, as well as various other market research reports. And you can see all of that on branddirectory.com, or if you just search Brand Finance Football Annual, it's a near 200-page book just with some really great insight that I think your viewers would really enjoy reading.
And I've conveniently placed the URL right here. So for those brand marketers, those who work with brand sponsorships and football and sports sponsorships, they should check it out, right? And so it's available for download through this website here. So thank you so much again, Declan, for coming on to the show. And maybe we'll re-invite you next time to come on the other podcast, Liverpool Supporters Podcast, and maybe riff about Man United, Liverpool rivalry, right?
Looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it. Okay, so I'll see you very soon. Stay safe, and we look forward to see you and your reappearance on our next podcast. Have a great day.
Thanks, man, and you.
Thank you.